Hello, my name is Mahmoud. I am from Sudan. I live in the United States. Today I would like to talk about the civil war in Sudan. The civil war started in Sudan in 2023, and most likely, if you heard about it, you either heard about the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, just in general, without much more details, or you heard the narrative that has been, for whatever reason, pushed by part of the Sudanese political establishment, and the Western powers and the Western media went along with it largely, which this narrative say that the Sudanese war is actually just an absurd war between two generals, which is for me an insane way to understand any war. And it's not true. It's a big lie about the war in Sudan, and I will try in this video to explain why this narrative is very reductionist and not true. To understand any war, you need to seriously ask who are fighting this war. In the case of Sudan, the war is between the Sudanese armed forces. We in Sudan criticized the armed forces or the Sudanese military for a long time. We waged 3 revolutions in the 1960s, 1980s, and then in 2018 to remove the military from power and transition into democratic form of government. And we have a long-lasting criticism for the military and the way they used to govern Sudan. Having that said, that doesn't mean the military is not the only legitimate power in Sudan. And the fact that with peaceful protests 3 times we were able to change this military and the military leadership, that shows you that we are dealing with knowing that there is a lot of criticism to the military. Still, it's a professional military that can be removed from power in a peaceful way, which happened in the 3 revolutions that we already did in Sudan. I'm saying all of this to avoid you misunderstanding me as supporting the military blindly or being naive about the military rule, etc., etc. So, the first part of the war is the Sudanese armed forces, the legitimate professional military that we had in Sudan since independence. The other part that is fighting this war is the rapid support forces. To understand the war, we need to have clear understanding for both of those parts. I briefly talked about the Sudanese armed forces. Feel free to go and read about the Sudanese history and the Sudanese armed forces and the mistakes and all the challenges that we had in Sudan with the Sudanese armed forces. What I will focus on in this video is the RSF, and I hope by the end of this video you'll understand why I find it very important to understand what is the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, that is at the moment mass killing high number of people, committing ethnic cleansing in more than one place, and just destroying the country. So let's start. To understand this force, which is called Rapid Support Forces, RSF, or Janjaweed, we will need to go back in history around 30 years or so. And this will be kind of a small historical review. I think it will be very important to understand part of the problems in Africa nowadays, especially in the Sahel region. And I will focus on the part that concerns Sudan, but I think it will be very useful in that regard. The Rapid Support Forces, also known as the Janjaweed, are a product of a long-term ecological crisis in the Sahel area and specifically in Darfur. The Sahel is a vast region located south of the Sahara, spanning several countries from Sudan to Mauritania. Some parts of the Sahel, such as the Darfur region, are largely comprised of 2 main groups of people: the nomadic herders and the sedentary farmers. When we say sedentary, we don't mean sedentary like lazy or the usual use of this term. Sedentary in anthropological sense means the people who reside in one area. They don't move from part to part. It's the opposite of being nomad. So in the Sahel region, there are two groups. There are nomads who move from area to area with their livestock, and they just herd their animals, and then they use this animal as their main economic wealth. The sedentary, the farmers who live in one area, of course, live on farming in one specific place. And those two types of people, tribes, they lived in the Sahel region for a long time, more or less in a peaceful coexistence. The competition between the two groups was minimal due to the abundance of fertile land available to both. So there was enough fertile land for both, for the farmers to farm and for the herders to feed their stocks, graze. The problem is, since the 1950s, the Sahel has experienced a long-standing worsening drought crisis, which reduced the available land for farming and or grazing. Now we have a competition on a land that is progressively becoming smaller and smaller. This, multiplied by population expansions, created a long-lasting conflict. Now we have been dealing since the 1980s, 90s, and 2000s. We have been dealing with a conflict resulting from, now there is a kind of more fierce competition over land. The conflict in Sudan's Darfur region, so now the Sahel region is a big region, as we said. Now we'll talk about the part of Sahel which is Darfur. The conflict in Sudan Sahel Darfur region took the specific form of a conflict between Arab nomad tribes and African farmers. This cannot be generalized on the whole of Sahel. This is only specific to Darfur. In the rest of the Sahel, you can find African nomads and Arab farmers. But in Sudan, the Arabs are nomads. In Sudan's Darfur, the Arabs are nomads and the Africans are farmers. Or in this conflict, I think it's a reasonable generalization to make. The land is the fertile land, the area where you can farm or use the graze, is becoming smaller and smaller, and the Arab nomads in Darfur and the African farmers in Darfur, now they have been competing over land for a while. And this was destined to reach a crisis point, but the dictatorship in Sudan under the rule of Omar al-Bashir, who ruled Sudan from 1989 to 2019. In the early 2000s, Omar al-Bashir, as part of a larger Sudanese national conflict between the center and the peripheries, for example, the conflict between the North Sudan, which is the center where Khartoum is, the capital. We had a long conflict between the North Sudan and the South Sudan that ended up in dividing the country into two countries, as you might know. Similar to this dynamic of the conflict between the North Center part, which tend to be more Arab, and the peripheries, which tend to be more African, a similar type of conflict started to intensify in Darfur. So the African tribes in Darfur started raising arms and starting kind of to rebel against the center under the rule of Omar al-Bashir. What Omar al-Bashir did is that he found an ally in the Arab nomads in Darfur. He armed them, supported them, and used them as a paramilitary militia in his fight against the Africans in Darfur. And this changed the dynamic from a kind of local, small-scale, not high-intensity conflict between Arab nomads and African farmers. Now, with the backing of the central government, the Arab nomads became much more powerful and organized and well-armed, and started fighting alongside the military. And And this basic formation was called, the local name for it among the people in Darfur was the Janjaweed. So now, instead of just random Arab nomad tribes fighting, etc., now we are having the Janjaweed as a militia that's fighting alongside the military. Now, armed and supported by the central government, the Janjaweed proved to be a very effective fighting militia, helping the government to achieve a significant military advantage. But along the way, they committed unimaginable atrocities, especially between the years 2003-2007 during what is now known as the Darfur crisis. The estimated number of deaths during the Darfur crisis is in the hundreds of thousands. Very credible reports of mass killing, ethnic cleansing, rape, etc. by the Janjaweed were evaluated by International Criminal Court. And actually, in 2025, Ali Kosheib, who is one of the Janjaweed commanders during the Darfur crisis, was found guilty by the ICC and will be sentenced soon to serve a life in prison. So he's in The Hague. He was, it's a long story how he ended up there, but he ended up being convicted and found guilty, and sentencing is coming soon. And that's for the atrocities that's committed by the Janjaweed in the Darfur crisis between 2003 and 2007. However, because bad actors are often rewarded in our world, unfortunately, the Janjaweed were rewarded by Omar al-Bashir government in 2013 with formal integration into the security apparatus under the name of Rapid Support Forces. So now we have Arab nomads in conflict with African farmers, Arab nomads fighting alongside the government under the name of the Janjaweed. Now, in 2013, getting a formal status in the security apparatus of Omar al-Bashir, the dictator Omar al-Bashir government, under the name of Rapid Support Forces, RSF. Omar al-Bashir considered the RSF as his insurance against coups. So the political crisis in Sudan kept getting worse and worse, and Omar al-Bashir started to feel more kind of anxious about his ability to retain power. And of course, those dictators don't care about risking the national security of their population. They just care about remaining in power as long as possible. And he thought if he is having a second army, let's say, that will make it more difficult for the first army to remove him from power. Of course, his calculations proved to be wrong, but that was the logic behind him making the RSF more and more powerful. The European Union, also rewarded the RSF in 2014 through the inclusion of the RSF as part of the Khartoum process. Khartoum process is a broad initiative aimed at curbing illegal immigration routes through the Sahara. So the Europeans, all they care about is to stop immigration, and the routes from Sudan to Libya, Sudan to Chad is a huge route that brings a lot of East Africans all the way to Libya and Tunisia and then to Europe. From the European standpoint, they wanted to stop this and to prevent people from using those routes no matter what, and they found the RSF to be a very useful tool because the RSF, being from there, Arab nomads from Darfur region, they are very familiar with those routes, and they prove to be effective to some extent in preventing immigration. So the European included the RSF in the Khartoum process, which is this broad agreement to try to curb illegal immigration. Of course, from one side, the Europeans will tell us that they are against the atrocities that committed in Darfur during Darfur crisis, and they condemn the Janjaweed, etc., from one side. And then from the other side, they go ahead and basically give them support and give them legitimacy by including them in these type of agreements. In 2015, the RSF was used as a private mercenary army by Saudi Arabia and the UAE during the Yemen war. The Omar al-Bashir dictatorship were trying to improve its relationship with those Gulf rich oil countries, and the Saudis and the Emiratis were in need for men to fight the war in Yemen, and they found the RSF as a very useful kind of private mercenary army. So they paid a lot of money to the Sudanese government under Omar al-Bashir and to the RSF to get some of them to go fight in Yemen. And this also allowed the RSF to start to have not only national kind of consolidation or increased power in the national scene, but also a regional, started to form some regional alliances. And since then, they continued to gain power and influence, becoming one of the main controllers of the gold extraction process in Sudan. So in Western Sudan, there are areas that are rich in gold, and now and since 2013, 14, 15, until this day, the RSF continued to gain more control over those areas, and that, of course, enriched the Dagalo family, which is the family that has the leadership in the RSF immensely, and then allowed them also to buy to be able to finance a larger army. In 2018, a revolution started in Sudan that ended up in 2019 by successfully toppling Omar al-Bashir government. So the Omar al-Bashir government is a dictatorship that lasted in Sudan between 1989 until 2019. And by the way, Omar al-Bashir himself was accused by the International Criminal Court as committing war crimes against humanity, and he's wanted. Like they had an arrest warrant for him. So in 2019, after 6 months of heroic mass protests, despite the brutal repression the Sudanese people faced, they successfully toppled Omar al-Bashir. Two main issues, among many others, but relevant to this video, two main issues the protesters addressed were the fact that the RSF, also known as the Janjaweed, had to be dealt with, and there are famous chants that the protesters used during those 6 months of protest. One of them was saying, translating into English, "Soldiers to their barracks and the Janjaweed should be dismantled." So the people kept saying this over and over again. Also, the protesters never forgave Omar al-Bashir government for its racist and inhumane treatment of people in Darfur, which we talked about before, by allying itself to Janjaweed and causing huge crisis in Darfur and killing a lot of people. The Sudanese people never forgave Omar al-Bashir for this. And they also chanted, and I'm translating from Arabic, you arrogant junta, Darfur is all of us. Darfur is all of us. The people kept chanting in the streets, remembering Darfur during their protest against Omar al-Bashir government. So, from one side, the protesters demanded that the Janjaweed, the RSF, to be dismantled. Also, they provided the reason why they wanted it to be dismantled, among other reasons, is what they did in Darfur. So, in a way, Omar al-Bashir paid a price for what he did by creating the Janjaweed, supporting them, causing them to kill a lot of Sudanese people. From the other side, the RSF, feeling that after the fall of Omar al-Bashir, they might have a better chance in solidifying their power. So now, very ambitious, Muhammad Hamadan Dagalo Hemeti, the leader of Janjaweed, he's very ambitious, very clearly. His calculation was that he understands that the Sudanese people the majority of the Sudanese people does not want his forces to remain a thing. They wanted it dismantled and removed as a functioning part of the security apparatus. Despite him knowing that, he still wanted al-Bashir government to go because he know the power vacuum that will result might allow him more chances to solidify his gains. Knowing that, he refused to intervene on behalf of al-Bashir government. He refused to intervene to support Omar al-Bashir in his last days and allowed him to fall. His assessment was correct. Hamdan Dagalo, the leader of RSF, assessment was correct. Despite being loathed by the revolutionary masses, the RSF exploited the instability following the regime change to gain significant ground, both politically by installing their leader, Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, as we said, as the second commander of the military council. So he became, in a way, the second most powerful person in Sudan after the revolution. That's from political standpoint. And militarily, by defeating one of the strongest security factions known as the Unit of Operation, هيئة العمليات in Arabic, Unit of Operation, and inheriting its intelligence capabilities. Now after the revolution, after he started defeating the military factions that were most hostile to him, and taking their abilities, including the intelligence capabilities, under his command, his militia paramilitary group became more stronger and stronger. On the economic side, the RSF expanded its operation and solidified its relationship with the UAE, United Arab Emirates, particularly in the gold trade. Now, the situation from 2019, the end of al-Bashir government, to 2023, when the civil war started, the situation is basically a political crisis that is deepening, and the Sudanese political establishment were not able to resolve the political and economic crisis on one side, and on the other side we are having this paramilitary group, militia, second army, getting stronger and stronger. At the same time, the rise of the RSF power in the country both angered large parts of the Sudanese army leaders and enticed powers like the United Arab Emirates to feel they can actually help the RSF be the main power in Sudan, and by doing so achieving an enormous geopolitical win, both in their regional interest in controlling ports and sea trade, and also their interest in Sudan's gold and other natural resources, among wider interest in Eastern and Central African mineral resources. This resulted in a brutal war between the Sudanese armed forces and the RSF. The problem is not only that we have a civil war in Sudan. There is a long history of civil war in Sudan. There is other civil war that happened in other parts of the world, and those type of conflicts can be resolved in a peaceful way. But I don't think what's happening in Sudan is just that. What's happening in Sudan is a civil war, with one part of the civil war being the RSF being a rogue, terrorist, ethnic cleansing committing, genocidal group. As a human being, as an individual, anywhere in the world, you cannot want peace with such groups. For example, no one is asking for peace with Boko Haram. People are asking to destroy Boko Haram, and they should. No one is asking for peace with ISIS. Every sane human being in the world, in Syria, in Iraq, in the Arab world, in the Muslim world, in the United States, everyone would like to destroy ISIS, because such groups, you cannot ask for peace with such groups. Groups that commit mass killing, they kill people on identity basis, racist basis, And in the case of the RSF or the Janjaweed, a genocidal group that tries to ethnic cleanse the parts they control in order to remove from some parts, to remove the African population from those parts and replace them with Arab population. You cannot ask for peace with such group. What you ask from such group is to stop fighting and to start to restructure itself, to change, to stop doing what they are doing, or you fight them. And you fight them, and when you fight them, you are in a what we call a just war. Now, since the war started, the RSF committed so many atrocities, and believe it or not, they mostly taped and videotaped and took pictures and took videos for their own atrocities, showing the world what they are doing, because the reason why they commit the atrocities is exactly a terrorist reason, meaning they use the atrocities as a way of war. So, for example, if they go like what they did in Al Jazeera region, when they go to a village and they kill whoever they find and they displace all the people who live in the village, like in Al-Sariha village or in other villages in Al Jazeera, they videotape what they are doing. So this is sending a message to the other people to not try to fight them. So this is exactly the definition of terrorism. So they committed a lot of atrocities. You can Google it. It's now available, especially with AI. Like, it's very easy to search for these things. And on the description, I put a link for a petition, and the petition that I would like everyone to sign has a lot of details about the atrocities they committed with sources from credible sources. What I will do here is I will mention one example of the atrocities that the RSF committed, and believe me, and you can double check for yourself, it's not the only example. You will find a lot of similar examples, unfortunately, just to show you that talking about a civil war that you want to stop will not solve the problem and might make it worse. Again, similar to Boko Haram, similar to ISIS, similar to Al-Qaeda, similar to a lot of other similar terrorist groups. You cannot legitimize and normalize these groups by trying to reward them for waging war by just asking to stop that war. You need to understand the following. Part of the Sudanese political establishment, angered by the long-term military rule and misguided by an unreasonable and extreme hate for the Islamists who have been supportive of the military, and the prior government that I talked about under Omar al-Bashir, the dictator that the Sudanese people removed in 2019, was an Islamist government in a sense. And now the Islamists, the remnant of the Islamists, after being defeated in the revolution, they are supporting the military. Because they are supporting the military, some people have, I don't know what you can call it, some sort of a derangement syndrome. They just stand against the Islamists no matter what. And in this case, standing against the Islamists in a way means standing with the RSF. So some part of the Sudanese political establishment decided to stand in neutrality between both sides of the war. Some of them are truly anti-war, sentimental type of people. There are just people who just kind of anti-war and they don't try to understand what's happening, but they are just anti-war in general. So that, but many of them, and those people, the people anti-war, I always respect. Like people who are just truly anti-war, they disregarding of who are you fighting with, even if the war is between the Syrian government and ISIS or something, they will just be anti-war. You respect that type of sentiment. But many of them are just hypocritical. And we're actually siding with the RSF and the United Arab Emirates for corrupt reasons. And you can try to research. This will be a very long video if I try to explain the reasons why the Sudanese political establishment is corrupt, but you can imagine. This political establishment spread a false idea about the Sudanese civil war, calling it an absurd war between two generals, as if the Sudanese history can be reduced to a childish fight between two kids. This lie is truly a post-truth. Sometimes they talk about post-truth society. This lie is truly a post-truth kind of lie. Why I'm saying that? Because it does not care about any realities on the ground. So they just say, oh, the two parts of the war are wrong. The two parts are the same. But on the ground, for example, since the start of the conflict, the RSF has committed widespread mass killing, looting, and forced large number of people to leave their homes so they can be replaced by other people from the RSF tribes, especially in Khartoum, in Al Jazeera, in central Sudan, when the areas where they controlled in the beginning of the war. This led to millions of people leaving the areas of RSF control, such as the capital Khartoum and Al Jazeera state. This is what happened when the RSF controlled the area. Once the Sudanese army regained control of these areas, Khartoum and Al Jazeera, millions of people were able to return to their homes, and now life gradually returning to normal. So you have two realities that's well documented. You can easily find it online. When the RSF controlled the area, looting, killing, displacement, forcing people out of their homes, leading to millions, tens of millions of people leaving these areas. The moment the RSF were defeated in Khartoum and Al Jazeera area, millions of people coming back to their homes, life is returning to normal, and the people, the atrocities and the killing stopped. Those real people on the ground are a testimony that this war is between a legitimate professional military, regardless of our valid criticism of it. We can always criticize the Sudanese military. There is a lot of to criticize, but still it's a legitimate professional military from one side and a rogue terrorist militia from the other. This one example. I'll give you another example for something worse that the RSF did. The majority of the mass killing actually happened in Darfur. I will just mention here one example, and you can look up the history of RSF atrocities online and find tens of similar examples. In June 2023, the RSF was able to capture the western city of Al Jineina, located near the border with Chad. They immediately killed the government of Darfur, Khamis Abbakar, after capturing him and torturing him while videotaping the incident. Then they killed around 15,000 people in matter of days, and forced 80% of Al Jineina population from the Masalit tribe to flee as refugees in Chad. How do we know the 80% left? Because we know the population before the war, like there is just census that was done at some point, and the population is around 500,000 people. And then now we know the number of refugees in the refugee camps in Chad. And you do the math, you find out at least 80% of people were displaced from their historic land. Like when I say historic, this is an understatement. It's ancient historic land, out of it to a different country to live in refugee camps. 500,000 people, 25% of the population of Gaza. Imagine if 25% of the population of Gaza were successfully removed from Gaza and pushed to another part, to a different country. It is hard to say that a war against such a terrorist, ethnic cleansing, genocidal group is absurd. Regardless of your opinion of the Sudanese army, and I am one of the people who were supportive of the protests in 2018, against the Sudanese army to remove it from power, to transition to a democratic government. I am one of those people. And now I don't believe in military rule. I don't believe that the Sudanese army should govern. Still, it is a professional, legitimate army against this mass killing, ethnic cleansing, terrorist militia. This war is not absurd. It's a just war for the just cause of dismantling this terrorist group. And by the way, the Sudanese people asked for this dismantling. In the description of this video, there is a link to a petition to designate the RSF as a terrorist organization. It's on change.org. The link will take you to change.org and you can sign the petition there. On the petition, I put a lot of details about the RSF atrocities other than the ones I mentioned in this video. Please sign it. Please send this video to your friends. Please send this video to your representatives. Help us defeat this terrorist group. Thank you for listening.